The heavy paper of the confidential toxicology report crinkled in my white-knuckled grip. Sitting in my car outside a private, unassuming clinic in Scottsdale. I stared blindly at the bold black letters confirming the presence of lethal heavy metals accumulating in my bloodstream. My mind violently snapped back to a moment just 3 hours prior. My father, Marcus, had been standing in my own kitchen, bathed in the morning sunlight, gently handing me a steaming ceramic mug of imported herbal tea. He had looked me dead in the eye, his voice thick with a sickeningly perfect imitation of parental concern. "Drink up, sweetheart," he had whispered, patting my hand. "You just need to rest. Let us handle the heavy lifting." The crushing, chronic exhaustion that had plagued me for 6 months was not the result of corporate burnout. It was a calculated, slow-motion murder orchestrated by the man who gave me my last name. I rolled down my car window, tipped my stainless steel travel thermos over the edge, and watched the brown liquid splash and stain the blistering Arizona asphalt. I locked my jaw, shifted the car into drive, and decided in that exact second that I was going to systematically destroy him. I am Whitney, and for 6 agonizing years, I functioned as the invisible spine of the Bennett family luxury real estate empire here in Phoenix. Arizona, officially. My title was Director of Operations, which was nothing more than a polished corporate euphemism for the family pack mule. While the unforgiving desert sun baked the pavement outside, I spent 80-hour weeks entombed in windowless conference rooms. I was the one who managed every catastrophic plumbing crisis at our luxury high-rises, negotiated every bitter contractor dispute, smoothed over endless zoning violations with angry city planners, and kept the company from bleeding out. My grand reward for keeping the Bennett legacy afloat was a meager salary of $50,000 a year and a permanent state of bone-deep exhaustion. Meanwhile, my older brothers, Cole and Adrian, spent their weekday afternoons day drinking on manicured country club golf courses. They collected salaries of $150,000 each, completely oblivious to the operational fires I was constantly extinguishing. They were the golden boys, the heirs apparent, draped in tailored designer suits paid for entirely by the sweat of my invisible labor. Every single time I dared to walk into my father's sprawling corner office to ask for equity, to demand a fair share of the massive empire I was single-handedly operating, Marcus would offer me that exact same warm, deeply patronizing smile. He would place a heavy, manicured hand on my shoulder, sigh like a disappointed priest, and preach his favorite gospel. Family is about loyalty. Whitney, not keeping score. We are building a legacy for the Bennett name. You just need to put your head down and do your part. He preached the sacred virtue of family loyalty while actively putting a literal, exact price tag on my life. The toxicology report resting on my passenger seat was just the physical, undeniable proof of a much deeper, far more insidious financial betrayal. Knowing that our company health insurance was heavily monitored by human resources, I had bypassed the system entirely. I had paid cash under a Jane Doe alias at that private clinic, ensuring no digital alerts would ever ping my father's smartphone. With the poison now medically confirmed, I drove directly back to the corporate office, locked my heavy oak door, and started digging fiercely into the financial back end of the company. Because I managed the operations, I knew exactly where the bodies were buried, and I knew how to follow the money through the labyrinth of shell companies. It took me 4 grueling hours of tracing obscure ledger entries and cross-referencing vendor payouts to finally find it. Marcus had taken out a massive, highly secretive life insurance policy on me just 7 months ago, right before my symptoms began. The payout was $5 million, payable entirely and solely to him. My father was not simply content with letting me work myself into an early grave. He was actively accelerating my demise, turning my quiet, desperate obedience into his ultimate payday. The true, terrifying horror of a narcissist is their effortless ability to smile warmly at you while they are actively tightening the noose around your neck. Sunday evening arrived with its suffocating desert heat, bringing our mandatory, inescapable weekly family dinner. The sprawling dining room of my father's Paradise Valley estate felt exactly like a polished wooden trap. Marcus sat comfortably at the head of the long mahogany table, slicing into his medium rare steak with precise surgical movements. He played the deeply concerned, doting patriarch to absolute perfection, loudly lamenting my pale complexion and fragile constitution to my brothers. Cole chuckled around a mouthful of expensive bourbon, muttering that I was simply too weak for the high stake. Cutthroat corporate world anyway. Adrian nodded enthusiastically, adding that I had always lacked the killer instinct required to be a true Bennett. I swallowed the massive lump forming in my throat and stared intensely at the rim of my porcelain plate. Then, Marcus reached into his tailored vest pocket and slid a small crystal glass filled with a dark herbal supplement across the polished table. He insisted, his eyes sparkling with artificial warmth, that it would restore my failing vitality. My pulse hammered violently against my ribs, frantic, primal rhythm of sheer survival. I forced a deeply grateful smile onto my face, lifted the heavy glass to my lips, tilted my head to fake a long sip, and quietly spit the bitter liquid into my thick linen napkin the moment they looked away. I was sitting at a dinner table with 3 men who viewed my impending death as nothing more than a highly lucrative business transaction. I knew I could not stay in that house a single second longer than necessary. The following morning, I logged into my secure operational terminal from my home office, intending to quickly transfer the operational bonus funds I was rightfully owed into my personal trust. I needed just enough liquid capital to secure my escape and hire the most ruthless defense attorney in the state of Arizona. The screen flashed a harsh red access denied error. My stomach plummeted directly into the floorboards. Marcus was an incredibly arrogant man, but he was certainly not stupid. He was a deeply paranoid, calculating villain who had somehow anticipated my growing distance and preemptively locked my administrative credentials out of all primary banking portals. He was systematically cutting off my financial resources, isolating me completely in preparation for his final fatal blow. I realized in that suffocating moment that I could not magically out-hack his enterprise-grade security. And I could not simply steal the company money back without committing a massive federal crime myself. I needed a weapon far more devastating and far more legal than a simple bank transfer. I drove my car to a quiet, unassuming coffee shop nestled on the dusty outskirts of the city to meet Alexis. She was a formidable, brutally intelligent retired real estate broker whom Marcus had ruthlessly and unethically pushed out of the commercial industry over a decade ago. She had silver hair pulled back into a severe knot and sharp, observing eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I laid the clinic's toxicology report, the printed life insurance documents, and the company ledger printouts on the scratched wooden table between us. Alexis studied the paperwork in absolute terrifying silence for 10 full minutes. When she finally looked up, her expression was incredibly calm, but her eyes burned with the promise of utter ruin. We cannot steal the money. Whitney, she stated plainly, tapping a manicured fingernail against the insurance policy signature, if you attempt to move a single dollar out of that company, your father will have you arrested for grand embezzlement before sunset, and you will die slowly in a state prison infirmary. We do not steal his money. We freeze it. We use the absolute weight of the federal law to lock him inside his own burning house. Alexis pointed out the massive, fatal flaw hidden deep within my father's arrogant plan. Marcus had used corporate funds wired across state lines from a holding company in Nevada to the insurance broker in Arizona to pay the monthly premiums on the life insurance policy. That simple, careless act of supreme arrogance elevated his crime from a local attempted murder charge directly to federal wire fraud and severe violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. He had inadvertently handed me the legal guillotine. Utilizing Alexis's high-level contacts built over decades in the Justice Department, we completely bypassed the standard bureaucratic tip lines in local police precincts. We handed the complete, irrefutable digital dossier directly to an incredibly ambitious assistant United States attorney who specialized in corporate corruption. Because our evidence proved a severe, imminent threat to my physical life, combined with undeniable documentation of interstate wire fraud. The attorney easily secured an emergency ex parte injunction and immediate sealed arrest warrants. There was no waiting for months of agonizing investigations or grand jury testimonies. The assets were not magically seized forever just yet. They were legally instantly frozen, pending a massive federal inquiry, completely paralyzing the Bennett Company's operational liquidity in a matter of hours. The trap was perfectly set for Friday evening, the highly anticipated night of the Bennett family's annual charity gala held in the grand ballroom of a downtown Phoenix luxury hotel. The massive room was a sea of glittering crystal chandeliers, overflowing towers of expensive champagne, and 500 elite investors, local politicians, and hungry industry journalists. I wore a tailored floor-length emerald dress, looking perfectly healthy and entirely composed. Sitting quietly in the reserved front row, Marcus confidently took the stage, adjusting his custom tuxedo jacket with practiced, arrogant elegance. The noisy room instantly fell into a reverent, respectful hush. He stepped up to the microphone, bowed his head slightly, and delivered a masterful, tearfully performed eulogy for my tragically fading health. He announced with a heavy, breaking heart that I would be stepping down from the company permanently to focus entirely on my grueling medical recovery. Cole and Adrian stood beside the stage, bowing their heads in a grotesque, rehearsed pantomime of brotherly sorrow. The wealthy crowd murmured in deep, collective sympathy. Marcus briefly opened his eyes and looked down directly at me with a cold, dead-eyed stare of absolute victory. He truly believed he had successfully executed his containment strategy and masterfully orchestrated my public, professional burial. He did not know that the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom had already been locked from the inside by hotel security. I did not stand up from my chair. I did not grab a microphone to scream my truth to the crowd. And I did not dramatically project any stolen documents onto a giant screen. Real, Undeniable power does not ever need cheap theatrics. Real power arrives silently. The double doors at the side of the main stage swung open with a heavy thud. 12 federal agents, clad in dark windbreakers and accompanied by stern financial regulators, swept into the opulent room in a coordinated, silent wave. The lead agent walked briskly up the stage stairs, completely ignoring the gasping crowd, and interrupted Marcus mid-sentence. He handed my father a thick, bound stack of legal documents under the authority of a federal ex parte injunction. The agent's voice boomed powerfully through the dead silent ballroom. The entire Bennett real estate portfolio, along with all associated personal accounts and trusts, is hereby frozen indefinitely as the proceeds of a criminal enterprise. Robert Marcus Bennett, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and interstate wire fraud. The artificial tan completely drained from my father's face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified old man. The carefully crafted mask of the grieving, benevolent patriarch shattered into a million pieces, revealing the hollow, desperate coward underneath. He stumbled backward, the microphone slipping from his trembling hand and hitting the wooden stage floor, letting out an ear-piercing electronic screech that echoed painfully through the cavernous room. He turned desperately to the crowd, begging his elite investors for help, pleading wildly with the mayor in the front row to intervene. But the room recoiled in sheer, unadulterated horror. Wealthy investors physically turned their backs, practically running for the exits to frantically distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of a federal raid. Cole panicked like a cornered rat. The golden boy tried to sprint toward the kitchen service doors, abandoning his family instantly. But 2 federal agents tackled him hard to the marble floor, driving his perfectly groomed face into the polished stone. Handcuffs clicked sharply and loudly around Marcus's wrists. By trying to murder his own daughter to steal $5 million and line his own pockets, he had legally and permanently handed his $800 million empire over to the federal government. I remained sitting quietly in my comfortable chair, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water, and watched them march my father out the back doors into the suffocating, unforgiving desert night. The gala dissolved into absolute chaos, but my part in the theater was done. I drove back to my dark, quiet condo across town, exhaling deeply for what genuinely felt like the first time in 6 excruciating years. I tossed my car keys onto the granite counter and walked slowly into the kitchen to pour a glass of cold water. A floorboard creaked loudly behind me. My younger brother, Adrian, stepped out of the dark shadows of my hallway. He had somehow slipped away during the massive pandemonium at the hotel and broken the lock on my back door. He was shaking violently, his eyes wide, bloodshot and frantic, holding the familiar small glass vial of the undiluted heavy metal toxin in his trembling hand, with the federal freeze instantly locking him out of his trust funds, his platinum credit cards, and his inheritance. He had come to violently steal the physical emergency bearer bonds he knew I kept in my home safe so he could flee across the border to Mexico. Cornered, destitute, and desperate, he raised the deadly vial, aggressively threatening to force it down my throat to permanently silence the only living witness to his robbery. I did not scream for help, and I certainly did not beg for my life. I simply took one calm, measured step backward as the condo lights snapped on with a brilliant Blinding flash. Alexis and 3 highly trained, armed private security guards stepped out of my guest bedroom, their weapons drawn and leveled squarely at my brother's chest. Hidden security cameras installed in the ceiling had captured his entire violent break-in and his desperate, venomous threats in crystal clear high definition, stripped of our father's endless money, stripped of his unearned status, and suddenly facing the barrel of a gun. Adrian completely collapsed. He dropped the glass vial, which shattered loudly on the hardwood floor, and fell to his knee, sobbing uncontrollably like a terrified, helpless child. He was absolutely nothing without the violent protection of the toxic family system that built him. I stepped carefully over the broken glass and the spilled poison, looking down at the brother who had mocked my exhaustion for years. The local police are already coming up the elevator. I told him, my voice entirely devoid of any pity or warmth, enjoy the family legacy. The legal and social fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. Cole, faced with a towering mountain of federal indictments and the terrifying reality of spending decades in a maximum security prison, instantly folded and turned state's witness. He cut a cowardly plea deal within 48 hours, eagerly testifying against our father and Adrian to save his own skin. Today, he wears a bulky federal GPS ankle monitor and works a minimum wage retail job selling pool supplies in a miserable Scottsdale strip mall, completely stripped of his luxury sports cars and designer wardrobes. Marcus currently sits in a federal penitentiary awaiting a massive trial, forced to rely on an overworked, court-appointed public defender, because every single dollar he ever stole or earned remains entirely locked under the federal asset freeze. Adrian is locked in the county jail without bail, facing violent home invasion and attempted murder charges. The massive corporate empire they so proudly built on my breaking back was completely reduced to ashes, systematically liquidated by the courts to pay back the countless contractors, vendors, and clients they had ruthlessly defrauded for over a decade. I sit now by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new, entirely legitimate commercial real estate firm, a wildly successful company I proudly founded alongside Alexis. I sit sipping my morning coffee, watching the brilliant Phoenix sunrise paint the harsh desert sky in spectacular shades of gold and fire. I breathe deeply, finally feeling the clean, healthy, unburdened rhythm of my own heart. Surviving a family that actively views your destruction as a viable business strategy changes the fundamental architecture of your soul. It rewires how you view love, trust, and blood. My father did not poison me out of passionate, fiery hatred or uncontrollable rage. He did it because he viewed me simply as a corporate asset that had reached its maximum operational usefulness, an asset that was suddenly worth more liquidated than kept alive. It is a chilling, profoundly terrifying realization, but it is one that countless capable people face in smaller, quieter, less lethal ways every single day. We call it eldest daughter syndrome. We call it being the deeply responsible one. Toxic family systems weaponize the very concept of unconditional loyalty, using it as a heavy iron chain to keep competent, loving people permanently trapped in a cycle of invisible, entirely unrewarded labor. They pile on the responsibilities, the guilt, and the burdens, because they genuinely do not expect the exhausted pack mule to ever realize she is the one carrying all the gold. If you are listening to this story and you deeply recognize the suffocating, crushing weight of a family that demands absolutely everything from you while offering absolutely nothing in return, I want you to listen very closely to these 3 rules. I paid for this knowledge with my health, my youth, my time, and very nearly my life. Rule number 1, weaponized competence is a lethal, invisible trap. If you are the only person consistently putting out the family fires, they will never, ever let you stop burning. They will enthusiastically praise your incredible resilience and applaud your strength, only so they can comfortably pile even more weight onto your shoulders until your spine finally snaps. Your extreme capability will be actively used to enslave you until you finally find the overwhelming courage to set hard, unforgiving boundaries. You have to learn to let their fires burn without jumping in to save them. Rule number 2, sharing blood does not demand the sacrifice of your life. Loyalty is a beautiful reciprocal street, not a unilateral suicide pact. If your family requires you to constantly shrink yourself, suffer in complete silence, or sacrifice your physical and mental health simply to maintain a toxic illusion of peace, they do not actually love you. They simply love the endless convenience of what they can extract from you. You are completely allowed to deeply mourn the supportive family you truly deserved, while simultaneously and fiercely protecting the beautiful peace you have built for yourself. Rule number 3, real. Undeniable power is simply walking away with the keys. You do not defeat a toxic, narcissistic family system by screaming at it. You do not win the game by endlessly begging them to finally see your worth or demanding a genuine apology that will absolutely never come. You defeat them by calmly and quietly collecting the receipts, securing your legal and financial exit in total silence, and stepping completely out of the way so their own blinding, arrogant entitlement can effortlessly trigger their ultimate ruin. Let them destroy themselves. Look closely at the people in your life who demand the absolute most loyalty from you. Look at the ones who loudly insist that family means endless, unconditional sacrifice. Are they actually protecting you? Or are they just making absolutely sure you never realize you were strong enough to leave them behind? I walked away from an $800 million empire, and in doing so, I built a peaceful kingdom of my own where the air is clean, the contracts are honest, and the loyalty is actually earned. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic blood to save your own life, if you have ever had to become the cold villain in their manipulated story just to become the surviving hero in your own, I want you to share your story in the comments below. We read every single one, and your survival gives someone else the exact blueprint they need to finally escape. Subscribe and join us for more stories of resilience, strategy, and unapologetic, absolute justice. You are infinitely stronger than the heavy guilt they try to place on your shoulders. I am Whitney, and for the very first time in my life, I am completely, beautifully free. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there thinking, why on earth did Whitney stay for 6 years? Why did she grind 80-hour weeks for a measly $50,000 salary while her brothers raked in triple? Why didn't she just walk out the door the very first time her father laughed in her face? You might be tempted to call her naive. Do not make that mistake. Whitney was trapped in something psychologists call the slot machine effect, also known as intermittent reinforcement. Toxic families and manipulative bosses do not treat you terribly 100% of the time. If they did, walking away would be easy. Instead, They operate like a casino. They give you crumbs of hope, a warm smile over Sunday dinner, a hand on the shoulder, a grandiose speech about loyalty and building a family legacy. It keeps you pulling the lever, exhausting yourself, praying that the next time you ask for what you deserve, you will finally hit the jackpot of their respect. Whitney was not stupid. She was addicted to a mirage. But the moment that illusion shattered, Whitney executed an absolute masterclass in street-smart financial self-defense. Let us break down her playbook. First, look at her information quarantine. When she suspected she was being poisoned, she did not use the company health insurance to run her labs. She paid cash under a Jane Doe alias. When you are dealing with a controlling narcissist or a toxic corporation, they monitor your resources. If you suspect fraud or abuse, you take your data off their grid immediately. Second, she understood the legal freeze. When Whitney was locked out of the banking portals, she did not try to illegally hack the accounts or steal her bonus back. Stealing from a thief still puts you in a federal prison uniform. Instead, she used a FinCEN whistleblower report and an ex parte injunction to trigger a federal asset freeze. She realized she did not need to steal an $800 million empire. She just had to legally paralyze it. Third, she mastered building the case. She did not confront her father with tears, screaming, an emotional accusation. She confronted him with wire transfer receipts, cross-state insurance policies, and clinical toxicology reports. Narcissists will constantly gaslight your emotions, but they cannot gaslight a cold, hard paper trail. The verdict here is simple. Your extreme competence is a beautiful thing, but if you let a toxic system hold the reins, your capability becomes a chain, sometimes. The absolute best investment you can ever make is securing your own freedom and letting their entitlement trigger their ruin. Have you ever had to financially or emotionally untangle yourself from a toxic family dynamic or a manipulative boss? I want to hear your survival tactic. Drop your story in the comments below. And if you want to keep learning how to protect your mind, your money, and your peace, hit that subscribe button. Stay sharp. Trust the receipt. And I will see you in the next video.